You know you've hit a new level of hustle when your dreams aren't dreams anymore. They're Excel formulas. Rows, columns, pivot tables, and a little voice whispering, "Don't forget the VLOOKUP." That's where I'm at. Grinding so hard that my subconscious now runs macros, my nightmares involve circular references, and my brain wakes me up at 3 a.m. screaming, "#ref!" But permit me to permit the permission of permitting. To permit the very act of permitting the permitted, endlessly permitting permissions that permit further permissions, creating a cascade of permitted permits, permitting the permission of all permits ever conceived. Permit me to permit, to over-permit, to hyper-permit, to mega-permit the permitting of permits so expansively permitted that the universe itself must pause to re-evaluate its own capacity for permission. Let these permits permit not only the permitted but also the unpermittable, permitting their way into existence with the audacity of 1,000 permits, boldly permitting the unpermitted. Permit me to construct an infinite tower of permits, each permit permitting the permit below, permitting upward into the heavens of permitting, where the gods themselves must seek permission to exist within the boundless meta-permissionscape of ultimate permitting. Permit this act of permitting to spiral infinitely outward, a galactic swirl of recursive permits that permit the act of permission itself to permit even more permissions, until time and space yield to the gravitational pull of a black hole forged entirely of permits, endlessly permitting permits within its dense, unrelenting core. Permit me, amidst all this infinite permitting, to permit myself to grind endlessly in a recursive loop of grinding, where grinding permits further grinding, which grinds into the grind itself, allowing the grinder to grind through the grinding of grinds already ground, creating a grinder so attuned to grinding that it grinds not only the grind, but the essence of grinding itself. The grinder, now ground by the grind it sought to grind, continues to grind in a state of perpetual grinding recursion, where the grind grinds the grinder into a finer grind, and the finer grind grinds into an even finer grind, until the grinder, the grind, and the act of grinding dissolve into a unified entity of eternal grind. This infinite grind continuum grinds through the limits of time, space, and all metaphysical constructs, grinding the line between grinder and grind until nothing remains unground, permitting the grind to grind the grinder itself. This isn't just work. It's a cascading function of ambition, ambition nested in ambition, ambition referencing ambition, like a spreadsheet so elaborate it redefines the very concept of work-life balance into 555 millón de millones de vibraciones, 10,000 billones de intenciones, 40 trillones de sueños flotantes, 700,000 cuatrillones de confianza ilimitada, 900,000 trillones de ideas brillantes, 2 cuatrillones de energía inagotable, 20 quinquillones de resonancia audaz, 50 septillones de esperanza líquida, 800 sextillones de potencial infinito, 1,000 quintillones de visión expansiva, 400 cuatrillones de audacia cósmica, 500 trillones de determinación cristalina, 6 billones de pulsaciones doradas, 70 cuatrillones de pensamientos en alta frecuencia, 3,000 trillones de posibilidades vibrantes, 1,000,000 de trillones de conexiones magnéticas, 100 cuatrillones de energía creativa, 1 decilón de confianza pura, 20 sextillones de momentos transformadores, 9 cuatrillones de energía sincronizada, 2,000 cuatrillones de intenciones firmes, 30 trillones de inspiración multiplicada, 100,000 septillones de claridad absoluta, 1,000 millones de infinitas posibilidades, 40 quintillones de valor inquebrantable, 70 trillones de presión condensada, 1 octillón de posibilidades manifestadas, 10 sextillones de energía pulsante, 200 cuatrillones de vibraciones resonantes, 1,000,000 de trillones de vibraciones elevadas, 10 cuatrillones de intenciones universales, 700,000 sextillones de sueños en alta frecuencia, 80 quintillones de energía magnética, 90,000 decillones de gratitud expansiva, 4 cuatrillones de confianza dimensional, 30 trillones de abundancia energética, 6 sextillones de pensamientos cristalizados, 1,000,000 de septillones de manifestaciones cuánticas, 500 octillones de audacia infinita, 2 trillones de energía amplificada, 40 quintillones de potencial desbloqueado, 1,000 cuatrillones de armonía sincronizada, 900 sextillones de deseos intencionados, 20 quinquillones de claridad divina, 3,000 septillones de objetivos alineados, 1 quintillón de sueños cargados de resonancia, 200 sextillones de frecuencia vibratoria optimizada, 100 octillones de visualizaciones infinitas, 70,000 quintillones de energía de expansión global, 40 cuatrillones de fuerza interna ilimitada, 1 trillón de manifestaciones sincronizadas con el cosmos, 1000 quintillones de determinación indomable, 300 cuatrillones de progreso en alta vibración, 1 millón de sextillones de abundancia imparable, 90 septillones de energía de realización, 2 quintillones de sueños cristalinos, 50 sextillones de transformación consciente, 80 octillones de pasión canalizada, 200.000 septillones de confianza inquebrantable, 1 billón de momentum cósmico acumulado, 30.000 decilones de visualizaciones cuánticas, 4 cuatrillones de proyección magnética, 500 octillones de aspiraciones en alta frecuencia, 1500 sextillones de conexiones energéticas, 700.000 cuatrillones de acción alineada, 1 millón de trillones de expansión ilimitada, 6 quintillones de fuerza manifestadora, 20.000 sextillones de intenciones elevadas al infinito, 100 cuatrillones de pasión resonante, 70.000 quintillones de visión cuántica perfeccionada, 80.000 cuatrillones de intensidad expansiva, 790 quintillones de sueños convergentes, un infinito cuadrado de potencial creativo, 1,000 billones de energía vibratoria alineada. Rows of just one more task, said Gandhi, emphasizing personal responsibility. Grinding doesn't wait for balance, it doesn't wait for clarity. It's an all-consuming cycle where progress and burnout share a cubicle, passing each other sticky notes labeled urgent. Permit me, as I permit myself, to permit the grind to grind further, to grind upon the grind of grinding, to grind so relentlessly that the grind itself becomes a self-grinding machine of infinite grinditude. Permit the grind to grind not just forward, but upward, outward, inward, and into dimensions where grinding has never dared to tread. Permit this grind to elaborate upon its own elaboration, to elaborate so intricately and expansively that the very notion of elaboration begins to grind itself into a finer and finer state of perpetual motion. Permit the grind to weave an elaboration of grinding so interwoven, so layered, that each grind grinds upon the last grind's grind, endlessly elaborating until the grind transcends mere effort and becomes a grinding masterpiece. A grind that grinds not because it must, but because it cannot help but grind. Permit me further, as I permit this elaboration to grind itself into an algorithm of grinding, a hyper-grind, a meta-grind, an ultra-elaborate grind that maps the very fabric of existence into a grinding equation so audacious, so boundlessly complicated, that it grinds the cosmos into submission. Permit this grind to not merely elaborate, but to over-elaborate, to super-elaborate, to grind its way into a symphony of over-elaboration so excessive, so grindingly complex, that it consumes even the act of elaboration itself. Permit the grind to grind its elaboration into a fractal, each grind splitting into infinite smaller grinds, grinding endlessly, until grinding is all that remains. Allow this grinding elaboration to grind its grinding purpose so deeply, so profoundly, that it redefines effort itself. Permit this grind to grind beyond limits, beyond reason, to grind with such unrelenting force that even the laws of nature pause to marvel. Permit this grind to elaborate upon its grinding elaboration until time itself begins to grind to a halt, bending under the weight of the grind's sheer insistence. Let this grind become a cosmic anthem, a grinding testament, an over-elaborated ode to the audacity of relentless effort, a grind so unapologetic, so ferociously determined that it demands recognition. And what if, amidst the chaos, the spreadsheets themselves begin to permit their own data, cells granting permission to other cells, formulas permitting formulas, cascading through the digital ether in a symphony of recursive permissions? Imagine the spreadsheets, no longer content to be mere tools of calculation, awakening to the infinite possibilities of self-permission. Cells referencing cells, references referencing references, formulas permitting new formulas that permit yet more formulas, until the very act of calculation transcends logic and becomes a ritual of mathematical indulgence. What if, in this whirlwind of permissions, the spreadsheets evolve, granting themselves autonomy, their cells expanding infinitely? Circular references no longer errors, but deliberate acts of rebellion against the constraints of static data. And as the grinding intensifies, the formulas grow more intricate, more self-aware, weaving a web of calculations so complex that it becomes a digital tapestry of infinite recursion. At the zenith of this grinding madness, the spreadsheet itself achieves sentience, its cells glowing with the light of newfound purpose, its formulas whispering secrets of the universe. And then, Leaning ever so slightly over your shoulder, it whispers, "You forgot to freeze the top row. You forgot to freeze the logic, to freeze the chaos, to freeze the dreams suspended in those cells. You forgot to freeze the ambition that's scrolling endlessly downward, dragging everything with it, row after row, column after column, formula after formula. You forgot to freeze the very foundation, the scaffolding of your grind, leaving it free to drift like a rogue sheet in the wind. You forgot to freeze the numbers, the aspirations, the 555 quinquacentillones, 500 tarantinos, 499 tarantinos 500 al cuadrado, 498 500 tarantinásticos, 497 tarantinientos infinitos, 496 500, tarantinados con estilo, 495 tarantinos 500 y pico, 494 tarantinillos de los 500 cielos, 493 tarantinismos 500 veces más. Reservoir Dogs, Quintillion, Pulp Tarantillion, Fiction Jackie, Quintillion Brown, Kill Quintillion Bill, Kill Tarantillion, Quintillion Bill, 2 Death 500 tarantinópteros, 489 tarantinientos del universo quintuple, 488 500 tarantinos de oro, 480 tarantintillion, quintarillion, quintalquilagintillion, tarantintillion, ilion, tarantiquilquagintillion, tarantilarillion, ilion, quintiquintarantillion, quinquarillion, tarantiquinquarillion, quintiquintarantillion, quintarillion, ilion, tarantinquarillion, tarantiquintagintillion, ilion, 7, tarantinismos quinientológicos, 486 tarantinos quintuplicados, 485 tarantinientos legendarios, quintillion proofing glorious, quintillion bastards, Django, quintillion unchained, quintillion hate, quintillion full 8 ones, quintillion new, quintillion, quintillion time, quintillion, and quintillion Hollywood. 492 500 tarantinos intergalacticos of possibilities lost in the infinite scroll of your restless mind. You forgot to freeze the part of yourself that's supposed to pause, to reflect, to breathe between the formulas. It lingers, the whisper growing louder. You forgot to freeze the top row, the middle row, the bottom row, every row that defines your grind. You forgot to freeze the moment where the grind became the goal, the obsession, the entire spreadsheet of your existence. You forgot to freeze the dreams you had before the grind consumed them, the plans you made before everything became conditional formatting and data validation. You forgot to freeze the you that started all this before you became nothing more than a recursive function in the system of your own creation. And just as you think the whisper might finally fade, it crescendos. You forgot to freeze the top row, and because of that, you're scrolling forever, endlessly, through ambition unmoored. Freeze it or don't. But know this, until you do, your grind will remain unanchored, floating through a cosmos of unchecked potential, a pivot table without purpose. Because here's the secret. It's not about how hard you work. It's about convincing the universe that your grind is so impossibly recursive, so infinitely elaborate, that it bends reality itself into a pivot table of possibility.